I want to talk about of course I want to talk about the Jacob story. That is, this is one of those stories that are just, it is too important. It is too important to the history of, to us as God-fearing people. Besides that, this is one of my favorite stories out of the Old Testament. It really is. This is one of my absolute favorites. Well, here, as this story begins, we see that Jacob is, he's getting ready to come back into the promise. He's been away, he's been at his uncle's place, he's been up with his uncle Laban, working there. He's gathered himself 2 wives, and he's had 11 children. Plus he has 2 concubines, and just tons and tons of servants, and just wealth, material wealth beyond imagination is what he's brought from his uncle's place and what he's going back to into the promised land. But the first thing that is going to happen as he gets back into the promised land is he's going to end up meeting his brother. He hasn't seen his brother in over 20 years. And his brother was hostile, was angry at him when he left. And so Jacob doesn't know how his brother is going to face him, how he's going to deal with him when he gets there. And so the night before, just before this story for today, just before the story picks up, Jacob had sent 3 caravans of gifts to his brother in hopes that his brother would not be angry with him. And so he sent those on ahead, and then that night he was getting ready to settle into the camp on the other side of the Jabbok. He's on the eastern side of the Jabbok River. And he's settling in for the night. And he decides then at that moment that he's going to move his family across and get them already into the promised land. The Jabbok River has been a borderland river of the Israelite people since Joshua's time. And so he's owned that for a long time. And here, this is the first place where you end up going back into the promised land, is right here at the Jabbok. So he sends his family across. He sends his 2 wives, his 11 children. This is trivia. How many children does Jacob have eventually? 12, right? But he's only got 11 here. 11 of his children were not born in the promised land. Only 1 is born in the promised land, and that's Benjamin. The last child is born in the promised land. All the rest are born up with his uncle Laban in the old country. That's a little trivia. So, he moves his entire family, his 2 wives, his 2 concubines, his 11 children, everything he owns, his tents, everything, and he moves it across the Jabbok into the promised land. But we note here in the story that when he comes to the Jabbok and sends his family across, he does not cross the Jabbok. He stays on the eastern side. That night he goes back to the spot where he was camping. And he's met there by a man. And we don't know who this man is. We have lots of interpretations. There's theologians that have dug into this character for centuries. For centuries they've been looking at who is this man. Is it God? Is it an angel of God? Is it just some stranger who's wandered by and is keeping Jacob from crossing? But no matter who it is, there's a challenge point here. This is the place where Jacob needs to decide whether he's going to go forward and back into the promised land or not. He has to make a decision here. And in some ways this decision turns into a wrestling match. But I think this wrestling match is more with Jacob himself. This isn't a wrestling match with God trying to keep him out of the promised land. This isn't that. This isn't a wrestling match with some stranger on the road who's trying to rob him. This isn't a wrestling match with an angel of God trying to give him some new message. I truly think, this is my interpretation of this, is that Jacob is actually wrestling with himself. Jacob is fighting himself. He's trying to be something different than he's always been, and he's coming to that place where he's got to reconcile himself with that. And so his struggle here is not with some stranger. His struggle is not with God. His struggle is not with an angel. His struggle is with himself. Who do I want to be as I move forward? As I move into the next stage of my life, as I move my 11 children across and my wife and my concubines and everything I own, What am I going to be when I cross over? That is Jacob's question. All of his life, Jacob has been one way. And now he's looking, what am I going to do next? And that struggle, before I move on to the point of my story here, in that struggle, when he gets finished and he's dislocated his hip and he's struggled and he's finally won the blessing and everything else that he's gotten, he's given a new name. He's given a new destination. He's given a new destiny, a new future. He's going to be Israel, a man who constantly struggles with God, trying to find out who he is. One of the interesting little bits of this is that at the end of this also, that Jacob calls out, he says, in this I saw the face of God. I saw the face of God, and I survived. The next day when he goes and sees his brother Esau, he uses those identical words. I look into your face, my brother, and I see the face of God. Jacob that night, as he struggled with who he was, he discovered not only who he was, he not only changed who he was and became something different, something new, something that is holy to God in some ways, he also sees God in other people now. He looks at his brother and he sees the face of God. He looks at this stranger and he sees the face of God. And maybe even in himself, he finally sees the face of God. You know, we are at one of those places right now. Not just here in the United States, but the worldwide. We're in one of those places where we're standing at the edge of the Jabbok, trying to determine who we're going to be in the next stage. We're wrestling right now with who we want to be. Not only as Americans, not only as people of this country, but also people of the world. This is a global effect that's happening right now. We're at that place where we keep running into things that we need to address and deal with and change in our society, in our culture, in our worldview. You know, this started out a couple of years ago, well, just a year ago. What was the biggest thing we were worried about? Climate change. That was the biggest thing we were worried about, climate change. Has that gone away? Still there. We're still moving toward climate change. We still have 125-degree temperatures in Saudi Arabia just a couple days ago. Hottest temperature on Earth ever recorded in civilized culture. So that's not gone away. The Arctic is still melting. We still have 70 degrees up in the Arctic and it's melting. The Siberia is still on fire. So that hasn't changed. That's still part of one of the dynamics of the world that we are living in right now. Things that we need to look at and address and fix before we disintegrate back into hunter-gatherers. So that's still there. What was the next thing that hit us? The coronavirus. All of a sudden we had the coronavirus. That has really ripped apart a lot of our culture, a lot of our society. It has shown some of the deficiencies, some of the errors, some of the broken parts of our country, of our world. Because it wasn't just us. This also is Australia and England and Germany and France and Spain and Italy and Mumbai and every place else on the planet. We're still dealing with that. Then we had George Floyd. Then we have Black Lives Matter, tearing into our own social structure, our own cultural society, our own worldview of us as Americans, looking at ourselves. Meanwhile, climate change hasn't changed. Climate change is still a problem. Meanwhile, coronavirus is still a problem. Meanwhile, we have Black Lives Matter tearing apart our social fabric. These are three things that are challenging us, not just here, but worldwide. These are global problems that we're dealing with, on how we deal with each other, how we deal with our society, how we deal with our climate, how we deal with creation. We are standing on the Jabbok. And we, at this moment, have an opportunity, as our world crumbles around us, of rebuilding, of creating something better to come out the other side of this. Better health care, better structural support for our industries and for our businesses and for our financial dealings with the world. Better on how we deal with our climate, better on how we deal with each other, how we deal with those that are different than us, those that are marginalized in our culture and our society. These are all things that Christianity calls us to be. And here we stand at that moment, one more time standing on the Jabbok, and we have to decide who we want to be. And we are wrestling with ourselves right now. The thing about it is, we will come out the other side. We will finish this wrestling match. We will come out on the other side, maybe with a dislocated hip. We may have to limp out of this. But in our limping out, we will create for our children and for our grandchildren something better. Something better for them, where they don't have to have the broken hip. Instead, they can walk forward in a new way. Amen.